At dawn on May 29th, 1453, the city of Constantinople held its breath. The sea breeze carried the faint scent of gunpowder and salt across the Bosporus. From the heights of the ancient walls, soldiers stared into the mist, where 100,000 Ottoman tents stretched like an iron sea. Inside the city, church bells tolled low and uneven, echoing through deserted streets and shuttered windows. For more than 1,000 years, this city had been the queen of empires, the last heir of Rome. Marble palaces rose beside quiet courtyards, mosaics shimmered beneath the domes of Hagia Sophia, and every stone whispered of forgotten triumphs. But now, that long story had reached its final page. Beyond the Golden Horn waited a 19-year-old conqueror, Sultan Mehmed II. To his followers, he was destined to fulfill a prophecy that one day a great leader would capture Constantinople, bridging east and west under a single banner. To the Byzantines behind the walls, he was the storm made flesh. Inside, Emperor Constantine Palaiologos stood with his dwindling guard, eyes lifted toward the rising sun. He had written his last appeals for help. None had come. Only faith and duty remained. When the first cannon roared, the sound tore through the dawn like the breaking of an age. Within those walls, the ancient world was dying, not slowly, but all at once. This is how Byzantium fell. This is how history turned the page. The story of Constantinople's fall does not begin in 1453. It begins with pride, memory, and the slow corrosion of time. Once, the Eastern Roman Empire stretched from the deserts of Syria to the forests of the Balkans. It was Rome reborn, wealthier, wiser, and for centuries unshakable. Its emperors ruled from the gleaming city Constantine the Great had built on the bones of ancient Byzantium. From there, they watched the West crumble, and in that ruin they found both security and arrogance. But empires seldom fall in a single blow. They decay in whispers. By the 13th century, Constantinople had become a ghost of its former self. The Crusaders who once swore to defend Christendom had turned their swords against it. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Latin knights breached the city's walls, looted its churches, and crowned their own puppet emperor on the Byzantine throne. The scars of that betrayal never healed. The treasures of a millennium were melted down. Icons broken, relics stolen. Many still lie today in the cathedrals of Venice and Paris. When the Byzantines finally reclaimed their city in 1261, the victory was hollow. The empire they recovered was fragmented, its provinces lost to rival powers and encroaching Turks. The Black Death arrived soon after, sweeping through Constantinople's narrow alleys and dim courtyards, thinning the population and draining its spirit. By 1453, the empire was little more than a legend surrounded by walls. Beyond those walls, the Ottoman Empire had risen, young, hungry, organized. Within them, Emperor Constantine V ruled over perhaps 50,000 weary souls. He was the last of the Palaiologos line, a man of courage and conviction. His coronation was modest, his treasury nearly empty. Yet he carried himself with the dignity of the emperors whose portraits still lined the palace of Blachernay. Constantine knew he was standing on the edge of the world's ending, and he met it without flinching. He spent his days fortifying the walls, gathering weapons, and writing pleas for help to the courts of Europe. Letters were sent to Venice, Genoa, and Rome, to kings who called themselves defenders of the faith. The answers were polite, regretful, and empty. Europe was tired. Its rulers quarreled among themselves, while faraway Constantinople felt more myth than ally. The emperor turned to his people. He summoned every able man, Greek or foreigner, to defend the city. Among them came a few Genoese mercenaries led by a seasoned captain, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a man whose courage would soon become legend. As winter turned to spring, the citizens of Constantinople watched the horizon darken with Ottoman banners. From the towers, they could see dust rising where the enemy marched. Within weeks, tens of thousands of soldiers encircled the city. Infantry, cavalry, and janissaries, the elite corps trained from childhood in the art of obedience and death. Constantine gathered his commanders in council. The hall was lit by candles that flickered against marble walls once polished by emperors and saints. The talk was measured but grim. Everyone knew the odds. God will decide, the emperor said finally, his voice steady. But we must act as though the decision were ours. That night, he walked the ramparts alone. Below him lay the city he loved, the domes, the lanterns, the slow curve of the sea walls. Somewhere a choir was singing the ancient hymn, O Lord, protect thy people. The sound carried through the wind like a farewell. Outside the walls, the Ottoman camps glimmered with countless fires. Mehmed's army was vast, more than 100,000 men, supported by fleets that blocked every approach. Drums beat in the distance, slow and relentless, like a pulse that refused to stop. Yet, within the city, hope endured. Priests preached that angels would descend to defend the holy walls. Rumors spread that a miracle would save them, that the Virgin herself would appear on the ramparts when the hour was darkest. People clung to faith because there was nothing else left to hold. Giustiniani organized the defenses with military precision. The weakest points were reinforced with barrels of earth and stone. Gates were sealed. Women carried water and stones for the soldiers. The emperor himself inspected every wall, every cannon. Speaking to his men by name for 53 days, Constantinople would stand alone. But in those early weeks, as the wind shifted over the Marmara Sea and the drums of war grew louder, a strange calm settled on the city. People continued to light candles in Hagia Sophia. Merchants still opened their stalls, though there were few customers. In the evenings, the sunset turned the sky blood red, and the sea reflected the color of dying fire. Some chroniclers later wrote that the air itself felt heavy, as though the city knew it was living its final spring. In the palace gardens, the emperor looked once more toward the western horizon, where no sails appeared. He must have realized then that no help was coming, that the fate of the empire rested not in distant allies or ancient promises, but in the courage of the few who remained. Still, he stayed. He chose to fight not for victory, but for dignity, for the memory of a world that once ruled from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. The empire was dying, yes, but its death, he vowed, would be remembered. In the spring of 1451, a 19-year-old prince stood on the shores of the Bosporus, staring toward the distant skyline of Constantinople. The morning light glimmered off the domes and spires, and the water between them seemed impossibly narrow, a stretch of blue separating the world that was from the world to come. That young man was Mehmed, son of Murad II, newly crowned Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. His father had died, leaving him a realm of vast potential. Armies hardened by decades of conquest, treasuries filled with gold, and borders that stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates. Yet to Mehmed it was not enough. He believed himself chosen, not merely by ambition, but by destiny. The Prophet Muhammad had once foretold, "Verily, Constantinople shall be conquered. What a wonderful commander will her conqueror be." Those words had echoed for centuries through Ottoman courts and barracks, but to Mehmed they were personal. He would be the one to fulfill them. His counselors advised caution. Previous sultans had besieged Constantinople and failed. The city's triple walls were legend. Even Mongols had turned away. But Mehmed was not his father. He was patient, calculating, and unshakably certain that fate bends to those who prepare. He began with silence. While his court whispered of diplomacy and alliances, he studied maps and siege treatises. He invited foreign engineers, Hungarians, Germans, even renegade Christians, to his court. Among them came Orban, a master cannon founder, who promised to build a weapon unlike anything the world had seen. Mehmed listened, intrigued. "Can you break the walls of Constantinople?" he asked. Orban smiled, his hands black with soot. "Given enough bronze and gold, my sultan, I can break the gates of hell itself." Mehmed granted him both. Soon, in the foundries of Adrianople, The great cannon took shape, a monstrous bronze weapon 30 feet long, capable of hurling a stone weighing 600 pounds over a mile. The ground shook when it fired. Birds fell from the sky. It would take 60 oxen and hundreds of men to move it, but Mehmed didn't care. Power was weight, and he meant to carry it. As the cannon roared its first test shot, Mehmed watched from horseback. The stone shattered a distant wall into dust. His officers cheered. The Sultan said nothing. He only smiled faintly and ordered preparations for war. While Constantinople prayed for salvation, Mehmed built a bridge at a narrow point of the Bosporus, where Europe and Asia nearly touched. He constructed Rumeli Hisara, the fortress of Europe, a massive stronghold opposite an earlier Ottoman fort on the Asian side. Together, they formed a chokehold over the strait, cutting off any ship that might aid the Byzantines. To those who questioned his purpose, he answered plainly, "The one who holds the throat of the world controls its breath." By late 1452, the fortress was complete. Its walls were so thick that no Christian ship dared pass without permission. When a Venetian vessel tried to defy the blockade, Mehmed ordered his cannons to fire. The ship sank within minutes. The message was clear. Constantinople was already surrounded, even before a single soldier marched. Inside the Byzantine city, the mood shifted from hope to dread. From the towers, watchers could see the fortress rising, stone by stone, just across the water. They knew what it meant. Still, the emperor sent one last embassy to negotiate. Mehmed received the envoys graciously, offering them food and gifts, before dismissing them with a single sentence. "Tell your master I desire no war, only his city." That winter, the fields outside Constantinople froze under snow. Farmers fled before Ottoman patrols. Every village between Adrianople and the Marmara Sea was emptied to feed the army gathering in silence. Blacksmiths forged arrowheads day and night. Timber was dragged from the forests of Anatolia to build siege towers and bridges. In March 1453, the army began to move. It was a sight no chronicler could forget. More than 100,000 men stretching beyond the horizon, infantry, cavalry, artillery, and the elite janissaries at the center. Alongside them came endless wagons, oxen and camels bearing food, tents, and powder. At the head rode Mehmed, cloaked in dark armor, a slender sword at his hip. He was calm, almost serene, as he led his people toward destiny. The march took 3 weeks. Villages emptied at their approach. The ground itself seemed to tremble. When the vanguard reached the plain before Constantinople, they halted and waited for the signal. On April 6th, the first Ottoman banners rose on the hills of Galata. From the city walls, the Byzantines watched in horror as the fields turned into an ocean of tents. The young sultan's camp was set upon a height directly facing the gate of St. Romanus, the city's heart. There, Mehmed unfurled his banner, a crescent of white upon blood-red silk. The siege of Constantinople had begun. A clash of faiths. The city represented more than territory. It was the heart of Eastern Christendom, the bastion of an empire that claimed descent from Rome itself. For the Ottomans, it was the city that divided the world, a symbol of defiance standing between them and the Mediterranean. To Mehmed, this was not conquest. It was coronation. He spent his nights studying reports, maps, and scripture. He prayed before dawn and worked until after midnight. His men admired him not because he was their sultan, but because he shared their exhaustion. He walked the camps without escort, speaking to soldiers in their own tongues. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, he burned with an almost feverish need to prove himself. His father's death had left him with doubters, men who saw him as a boy among wolves. Constantinople would silence them all. When his generals urged patience, warning that the city might resist for months, Mehmed's reply was sharp. "Then we will give them months they will never forget." His vision extended beyond faith or vengeance. Mehmed understood that capturing Constantinople would make him more than a conqueror. It would make him a legend, bridging two worlds and crowning his empire as the successor to Rome. The Byzantines knew this too. For them, this siege was not just survival, it was identity itself. Inside the walls, Emperor Constantine ordered mass processions through the streets, carrying icons and relics believed to protect the city. People knelt on cobblestones, weeping and praying, while distant thunder from the Ottoman cannons echoed like a warning from heaven. Every sunrise seemed borrowed, every night felt like the last. The weight of prophecy. When the first cannon was rolled into position, the ground quaked beneath its wheels. It took more than 200 men and a team of oxen to move it into place. The weapon towered over the soldiers, its bronze muzzle wide enough for a man to crawl inside. At dawn, Mehmed gave the order to fire. The explosion tore through the still morning. Birds scattered from the city walls. The stone projectile screamed across the plain and smashed into the Theodosian walls, sending a plume of dust and debris into the air. The defenders shouted in shock. For the first time in history, the invincible walls had trembled. The Sultan smiled. "Let it be written," he said quietly, "that on this day, the walls of Rome shook." That single shot was more than a weapon. It was a prophecy fulfilled in bronze and fire. But the cannon was also slow and temperamental. It needed hours to cool between shots, and the massive stones often shattered upon impact. Still, Mehmed pressed on, ordering batteries of smaller cannons to hammer the walls day and night. Inside the city, the defenders worked in silence. They patched breaches, replaced fallen stones with sandbags and timber, and buried the dead by moonlight. Both sides prayed. Both believed God was on their side. The Sultan's Dream. As days turned into weeks, the siege became a rhythm of thunder and dust. Mehmed slept little. Chroniclers say he often stood alone at night, watching the faint glow of the city across the plain. To his men, he spoke of glory and victory. To himself, perhaps, he whispered something closer to obsession. He once told his tutor, Akshemseddin, "Rome ruled the world by the sword. I will rule it by destiny." On the 43rd night of the siege, Mehmed dreamed. He saw a crescent rising over Hagia Sophia, its light covering the world. When he awoke, he knew what had to come next. He would not just defeat Constantinople, he would bury the Byzantine Empire, and with it, the last memory of Rome. By May 27, 1453, the end was no longer in question, only the manner of it. The walls of Constantinople, once thought invincible, bore the scars of endless bombardment. The great Theodosian walls, layered in stone and legend, trembled with every strike of Ottoman cannon fire. Within the city, silence had become an enemy of its own. Markets stood deserted. Wells ran low. The people, once heirs to Rome, now looked like ghosts in their own empire. Rumors spread faster than rations. Some whispered of angels who would descend upon the walls to save the city. Others spoke of prophecies that foretold this exact moment, the fall of the Second Rome to the sons of Ishmael. Constantine V, Palaiologos, the last emperor, refused to surrender. He was no longer an emperor of a vast realm, only of crumbling towers and weary souls, but his bearing never faltered. He stood at the ramparts each dawn, armor dulled by smoke, gaze fixed on the horizon where Mehmet's banners fluttered like dark waves. To those around him, he seemed less a ruler and more a symbol, an echo of something ancient refusing to die quietly. Across the field, Sultan Mehmet II watched the same horizon, but with a different fire in his eyes. Barely 21, he was already a conqueror who saw history not as fate, but as conquest waiting to be written. He called himself Kaiser-i Rum, Caesar of Rome, claiming by right what the Byzantines had long claimed by legacy. For weeks, Mehmet had tested the city's defenses. His engineers adjusted cannon angles, shifting positions under cover of night. He had tunnels dug beneath the walls, only for Byzantine counterminers to collapse them in brutal underground skirmishes fought by torchlight. Yet he learned, adapted, waited. The final assault was set for May 29th. The moon that night turned red, a blood moon, hanging over the city like an omen. Priests led processions through the Hagia Sophia, the ancient cathedral still echoing with hymns in a language that felt older than the walls themselves. Thousands gathered inside, Orthodox and Catholic alike, divided no longer by creed, only by destiny. Candles flickered over faces streaked with tears and dust. Constantine entered the Hagia Sophia in silence. Some say he prayed for deliverance. Others say he prayed for courage to die as an emperor should. As dawn approached, he rode along the battlements one last time, addressing his soldiers, not as subjects, but as brothers. He spoke of their ancestors, of Rome, of faith and honor. He reminded them that history had chosen them to stand in the final chapter of an empire that had lasted 1,000 years. There was no illusion of victory, only the promise of remembrance. Then, as the sun rose, the Ottomans advanced. The first wave was chaos, irregular troops, the Bashibazouks, storming forward with wild cries. They were meant to exhaust the defenders, not to win. Arrows darkened the air. Stones and boiling oil rained down from the walls. Men screamed, fell, and vanished into the smoke. But the walls held at first. Then came the Janissaries. Disciplined, relentless, silent, clad in steel and faith, they moved like a tide. Behind them, the thunder of the great cannon shook the ground, each shot ripping through stone, dust, and prayer alike. At the Kirkaporta gate, fate turned. A small postern gate, long thought sealed, was left open, perhaps by chance, perhaps by exhaustion. Ottoman soldiers poured in. The defenders tried to rally, but confusion spread like fire in dry grass. Constantine fought among his men, sword in hand, armor unadorned. Witnesses later said he cast aside his imperial regalia so none would know him in death. Surrounded, he vanished into the melee. His body was never found. By noon, the city was lost. The crescent flag rose above the Hagia Sophia, its bells silenced forever. Inside, Mehmet rode through the gates on horseback, surveying what had once been the heart of Eastern Christendom. He ordered the cathedral spared, but converted into a mosque. When he entered, he paused beneath the vast dome, sunlight breaking through shattered windows. Some chroniclers say he recited a single verse from the Persian poet Sa'adi. The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars. The owl calls the watches in the towers of Afrasiab. It was not triumph that filled him then, but reflection. Outside, the last cries faded. Smoke curled from the ruins. 1,000 years of empire ended in a single morning, and yet, from that fall, a new empire was born. The Ottoman world rose from the bones of Byzantium, its art, architecture, and ambition carrying the echoes of both crescent and cross. The Roman dream, reshaped under a new banner, continued eastward into another age. The fall of Constantinople was not merely the death of a city, it was the closing of an era, the turning of history's great wheel, for in that moment, East and West exchanged their places once again, and the world would never be the same. The city fell, but the echoes of Constantinople did not fade with the smoke. They lingered, in whispers, in exiles, in memory. For those who had lived through that final dawn, the loss was not only of stone and sovereignty, but of an entire world that had believed itself eternal. In the days following the conquest, silence gave way to mourning. Streets once lined with marble and mosaics now ran with ash and ruin. The Hagia Sophia, the beating heart of Christendom for nearly a millennium, stood transformed. Its golden mosaics were veiled, its icons hidden beneath plaster, and the call to prayer rang through the dome for the first time. For the people who remained, it was a sound both haunting and beautiful, a symbol of the world shifting beneath their feet. Mehmet II entered the conquered city not as a barbarian, but as a ruler claiming inheritance. His soldiers looted, as armies always had, but Mehmet soon called for order. He declared himself not the destroyer of Constantinople, but its rebuilder. To him, this was not an end. It was a beginning. He saw the city not as the corpse of Byzantium, but as the heart of his new empire. He renamed it Constantinople, the Ottoman name for the city, and declared it his capital. From its ruins, he envisioned a new Rome, one that would surpass the old. He invited scholars, artisans, and merchants from across the empire to settle there. Greek and Armenian craftsmen repaired the broken walls. Muslim architects raised new domes and minarets beside the ancient towers. Within decades, Constantinople, now Istanbul, rose again, not in imitation of its past, but as a fusion of civilizations. The Byzantine soul lingered beneath the Ottoman skin. Its churches became mosques, but its streets still followed the same ancient lines. Its people changed names, faiths, and languages, but the pulse of the city endured. Far beyond its gates, the fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through the Christian world. Europe awoke to a new reality. The old eastern bastion that had stood as a shield against Asia was gone. Panic spread through the courts of kings and popes alike. They feared that the Ottomans would not stop at the Bosphorus, that the road to Vienna, to Rome, perhaps even to the Atlantic, now lay open. And yet, for all its dread, the fall also sparked renewal. Refugees from the Byzantine Empire fled westward, carrying with them manuscripts, knowledge, and ideas long preserved in the libraries of Constantinople. They found homes in Italy, in France, in the rising universities of Europe. Greek scholars taught the classics to eager minds, Plato, Aristotle, the forgotten philosophies of antiquity. From that exchange of worlds, something unexpected bloomed, the Renaissance. The death of Byzantium fed the rebirth of the West. The old empire had fallen, but its wisdom, its art, its science, its theology flowed like a hidden river into new soil. What had been lost in empire was gained in enlightenment. Mehmet II too became more than a conqueror. He was a man who understood symbolism. To rule Constantinople was to inherit Rome's mantle. He commissioned scholars to trace his lineage back to the Caesars. He studied Greek philosophy, employed Christian architects, and called himself Caesar of the two worlds, ruler of both East and West. Under his rule, Istanbul became the jewel of the Ottoman Empire. The Grand Bazaar, Topkapi Palace, and the great mosques of his successors turned the city into a living monument to both conquest and continuity. Still, for the Greeks, the pain endured for centuries. To them, the fall was not history, it was a wound. Songs were sung of the last emperor, Constantine V, who would one day rise again when the city returned to Christian hands. The prophecy lived on, that the marble king still slept beneath the Golden Gate, waiting for the day he would awaken to reclaim his throne. The memory of Constantinople became a symbol of loss and faith intertwined. Even centuries later, as Greek independence movements stirred in the 19th century, their banners bore the double-headed eagle of Byzantium. The empire had perished, but its identity lingered like a ghost, unseen, unforgotten. Meanwhile, for the Ottomans, the conquest marked their true ascension. From a frontier sultanate, they became a world empire. Istanbul became the crossroads of continents, cultures, and ambitions. Trade from India and Arabia flowed through its harbors. Diplomats from Europe knelt in its courts. For the next 4 centuries, it would stand as one of the great capitals of the world, multicultural, powerful, and ever restless. But history, ever cyclical, would one day turn again. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire faced the same decay that had once doomed Byzantium. The empires of Europe industrialized, colonized, modernized. Istanbul, once the center of the world, became a memory of greatness past. And yet, even as empires fell and nations rose, the spirit of the city endured. Modern Istanbul still bears the bones of its ancient past. Beneath its streets lie Roman cisterns and Byzantine chapels. The Hagia Sophia stands again between worlds, neither fully church nor mosque, but both, as it has always been, a monument to faith and to time. The story of Constantinople is not a story of loss. It is a story of transformation. Empires rose and fell upon its stones, yet the city lived on. It was never truly conquered. It merely changed its voice, and that, perhaps, is the quiet truth history tries to tell, that no civilization truly ends. It dissolves into the next, reshaped by the hands that inherit it. Constantinople did not die in 1453. It became something else, something larger than itself. For as long as humanity remembers the walls that once held Rome's last light, the spirit of that empire will never vanish. It lives on, in the domes, the ruins and the stories whispered across centuries. The empire may have fallen overnight, but its echo will last forever. Centuries after its fall, Constantinople still haunts the imagination of the world. It stands as both a memory and a mirror, reflecting the ambitions, failures, and transformations that define civilization itself. To speak of its legacy is to speak of everything that followed: empire, faith, culture, and the unending dialogue between East and West. When the walls fell in 1453, the world did not end. It simply shifted its axis. The Byzantine Empire, with all its theology and philosophy, did not vanish into dust. Its remnants became threads in the fabric of the Ottoman world, and through that, the old Roman ideal, the dream of universal empire, found a strange new life under the crescent moon. For the Ottomans, Constantinople was both prize and burden. They inherited not only a city, but a civilization. The conquest gave them legitimacy, prestige, and destiny. Mehmet II's successors called themselves Padishah of Rum, rulers of the lands of Rome. Their court ceremonies echoed Byzantine pomp. Their architecture borrowed the city's spirit. The Hagia Sophia inspired the Blue Mosque, and the Byzantine imperial traditions found new rhythm in Ottoman robes and rituals. The city became a synthesis, where Greek met Turk, Christian met Muslim, and East met West. The Bosphorus was no longer a border. It was a bridge. Scholars wrote in Arabic, Turkish, Greek, and Persian. Merchants traded silks beside manuscripts. Churches and mosques shared walls, sometimes even stones. This coexistence, uneasy yet real, became the foundation of a civilization that would dominate for centuries. But beyond its new rulers, Constantinople's fall transformed the world beyond its shores. In Europe, it lit a fire of both fear and discovery. The loss of the great Christian stronghold spurred kings to look outward, toward the seas. The quest for new trade routes, bypassing Ottoman control, led Portuguese ships down the coast of Africa and Spanish caravels westward into the Atlantic. The age of exploration. And eventually, the modern world began in the shadow of that fallen city. Columbus himself sailed not just for gold, but to reclaim the wealth once channeled through Constantinople's ports. The fall of one empire propelled the rise of another. In the Orthodox East, the fall marked a spiritual migration. With Constantinople gone, the mantle of the Third Rome passed to Moscow. The Russian Tsars claimed descent from Byzantine emperors, marrying into the old dynasties, adopting the double-headed eagle as their emblem. The Orthodox faith found new sanctuary in the north, preserving liturgies and traditions that had once echoed in Hagia Sophia's vast dome. Thus, in losing its empire, Byzantium multiplied its influence. Its faith lived on in Slavic lands, its art and knowledge in Western Europe, its architecture and administration in the Ottoman realm. Constantinople had fallen, but its spirit had been absorbed by every power that came after. And through all that, the city itself, renamed, rebuilt, reimagined, remained at the heart of the world. Istanbul became a capital of empires, a city of poets and soldiers, a home to Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Turks, Arabs, and Persians. For centuries it thrived as the city of the world's desire. Even today, Its skyline tells the story of that layered inheritance. Domes and minarets, towers and ruins, all woven into one silhouette. But perhaps the deeper legacy of Constantinople is philosophical. It reminds us that history does not draw clean lines between victors and vanquished. Every conquest carries within it the conquered. Every triumph inherits the past it seeks to replace. Mehmet II did not destroy Rome. He became its heir. The Renaissance did not reject Byzantium. It was born from its ashes. The fall of Constantinople stands as one of history's great paradoxes, the end of an empire that became the seed of countless beginnings. Even today, its story carries lessons. It speaks of endurance, how ideas can outlive walls, how faith can change form yet remain whole, how civilizations evolve through contact, not isolation. It cautions, too, against arrogance, for even the mightiest empire can crumble when it forgets that time favors no throne. In the quiet corners of Istanbul, you can still feel it, that weight of centuries layered upon each other. Beneath the modern noise, the whispers of Byzantium linger. In the chill of dawn by the Golden Horn, in the echoing corridors of the Hagia Sophia, in the way the light touches stone that once knew emperors and sultans alike. The cross and crescent, once symbols of bitter division, now coexist above that skyline, less as rivals than as reminders. They mark a city that survived every attempt to define it, a city that belongs to both worlds and neither. And so, the story of Constantinople is not one of endings, but of transformations, of how the world remakes itself through loss, and how history never truly closes its doors. Empires fall, faiths rise, names change, but the city, the idea of it, endures, still watching, still listening, still standing at the crossroads of the world.